And here is the setup. A man's wife has cheated on her husband, has gone astray, and broken faith with him, in that a man has had carnal relations with her, unbeknownst to her husband. Okay, a woman has cheated on her husband, and she keeps it secret. She's not about to tell, and there's no witness against her, right? So she's cheated. There's no witnesses, but he's suspicious. Or, and here's the important part, or she hasn't cheated and he's suspicious anyway. The whole test is based on this uncertainty. The husband thinks she's cheated on him, but he has no way to verify it. So how can he find out the truth? Before we get into the ritual to determine whether she's guilty or not, I'm going to ask a question that I think is implicit in the text, which is this. Why is the husband suspicious in the first place? It doesn't say so, but I think the logical answer is that she's pregnant and he doesn't think it's his. Obviously, I'll tell you in a second, it'll come up why I think this is likely. But again, we have seen in a whole bunch of places, in this study, in previous studies, all over the Bible, right, the incredible concern with inheritance and the land belonging to the right people, right? Paternity was of huge consequence. That's why there are laws against adultery. That's why we have all of these family relation laws. But paternity is, without paternity tests, of course, the only way to tell if somebody has cheated or not is like an oath of some sort, right? They have to, as with the vows, right? They have to invoke God's name, which is powerful and scary. So my suspicion here is that she is pregnant, and he is concerned that the child may not be his. Okay, what is the ritual to determine if she's a cheater? It's not actually so far off from perhaps more familiar rituals to determine, like, is a woman a witch? How do you tell if she's a witch? You burn her, and if she dies, she's not a witch. Okay, it's not that bad here, but there's a whole category of these kinds of tests in the ancient world that they're called water tests that involve either like putting somebody underwater or into a river and seeing if they float or if they drown. The floating, I admit, might be Monty Python, but it's the same idea. Here we have another water ritual. So what happens here? The priest brings her forward. She stands in the sanctuary. That's what before the Lord means. And the priest takes some water and some dirt from the sanctuary floor, and he mixes them together, which is already gross enough. I think we talked some weeks ago, somebody asked a question like, is there a mechanism for cleaning the floor of the sanctuary with all the blood? And I was like, not in the Bible. So anyway, taking dirt from the floor, gross, and mixing it with this water. And then he says the important words. If no man has lain with you, if you have not gone astray while married to your husband, then be immune from this water of bitterness that induces the spell. If you haven't cheated, you'll be fine. But if you have gone astray while married to your husband and defiled yourself with a man other than your husband, and here he goes ahead and says the thing, may the Lord make you a curse and an imprecation among your people, or an execration, as the Lord causes your thigh to sag and your belly to distend. May this water that induces the spell enter your body, causing the belly to distend and the thigh to sag. What does that stuff at the end mean? That is like clearly the bad part, the punishment. It is, for most readers, a little unclear, in part because it employs euphemism. I will admit the NR. This is the JPS translation that I've put up here. The NRSV translation is a little bit clearer, in part because it simply translates the euphemisms into more contemporary language. May this water that brings the curse enter your bowels and make your womb discharge, your uterus drop. Okay, so you have to remember that the word belly, from the JPS version, can indeed often mean womb, and the word thigh, right, cause your thigh to sag in the other translation. Thigh is a pretty common biblical euphemism for genitals, male, or as here, female. The most famous example of this, while I'm on the topic, being where Abraham has is sending his slave to go get a wife for his son Isaac, and he makes him swear an oath that he won't rest until he finds a wife. And he says, "Place your hand under my thigh and take this oath." And there, almost for sure, thigh is euphemism. Anyway, here too, thigh a euphemism for female genitals. So what is being threatened here, I think, is pretty clearly miscarriage, right? It will make your womb discharge. And this is why I think that the woman is pregnant when the husband grows suspicious, right? Because the idea is she's pregnant, and if it's not his child, when she drinks this thing, she's going to miscarry, thereby solving the problem of an inheritance at the very least. And the dropping uterus part of it, perhaps literally a prolapsed uterus, as some commentators have suggested. Whatever it is, it seems to be something that prevents future pregnancies. As it says further on, if she's innocent, she will be able to conceive children, which means that if she's not innocent and the curse befalls her, presumably she will be rendered sterile or infertile. So two parts of this. The getting rid of the pregnancy that is the cause of the consternation right now, and also the prevention of future pregnancies, all of which obviously is terrible. Infertility, if only someone had ever written a book on this, ding. Infertility being a terrible, or like a really shameful and much to be avoided fate for women in ancient Israel, as the Bible tells us over and over. Okay, so the test here is the woman hears the spell and she drinks this special dirty water, which I should add is even dirtier because the priest writes the spell on a scroll and then scrapes the ink off the paper into the water along with the dirt from the floor. Like, this is decidedly gross. And it is hard to imagine that it wouldn't make someone sick. But actually, and I think this is worth noting, it probably wouldn't make someone miscarry. In other words, I suspect this is a test that perhaps never really resulted in a guilty verdict. Though I'm actually not sure how much that matters, because I'm not sure that this ever really happened, right? I'm not really talking here about something that might, like, would this actually work? Like, no one is doing this in real life. And certainly no one's been doing this for forever, if it ever was done. What we're talking about here is a text, though, right? A text from the Bible that clearly imagines this potion as potentially efficacious. And in that, it is actually just as bad as if it did work in real life. Because it's not whether it happened historically in the past at any point that matters, right? It's about this text that is like the Bible, this text that encodes this very clear power imbalance between the man and the woman. This ritual is something that, in theory, a man could make his wife undergo whenever he wants. She might pass the test once, but it doesn't mean she can't be brought back again. Of course, if she's guilty, she gets punished, like socially, but also bodily, right? Like in her actual person, right? She is like, her body is changed. And if she's not guilty, right, if her husband makes her go through all of this stuff, all these terrible things, right, he brings suspicion down on her. He brings her to this ritual at the sanctuary where the priest is now going to be suspicious. She has to go through all this stuff. And it turns out she's not guilty. Nothing happens to him. It's entirely one-sided. The man shall be free from iniquity. The woman shall bear her iniquity. What's more, it's also entirely one-sided, of course, because while a man can make his wife go through all this if he thinks she's been unfaithful, there is no such ritual the other way. There is no test or ritual for male infidelity, right? There's no curse. There's no forced sterilization or anything. Right? And I should say this too is another reason I suspect she has to be pregnant for this ritual to make sense. Right? This is in fact something that only a woman can undergo. Right? It has to do with the loss of the pregnancy, and that's what's really at stake. And I will add that the whole ritual hinges on the idea of shame, which so often attaches to women in the Bible. When she stands before the priest, he dishevels her hair, right? Which is, as in so many sort of traditional cultures, the idea that she should another man is touching her hair and messing it up somehow, or perhaps it's unclear, perhaps letting it loose or uncovering it, whatever it is, right? There's nothing else like this really in any other ritual I know of where a woman's hair is involved. I think it very clearly speaks to shaming. And of course, the whole idea is that if she is in fact guilty, she will become an execration among her people, right? They'll be like, oh, you really don't want to be like Margaret, or whatever her name is. Probably not Margaret. But she becomes like a byword, right? A curse, right? Don't be like Margaret, who had a miscarriage and who can no longer get pregnant, and who one assumes is divorced in some, pretty soon hereafter. Point is, the ritual is gross, like truly, it's disgusting, but it's also terrifying, right? And that surely is part of, if not in fact most of, the point. If it isn't actually efficacious medically, I think it certainly is socially. It's a test and a text meant to scare women into staying faithful, into giving their husbands no reason to doubt their infidelity. If you thought that this could happen to you, even if you didn't do anything, right? Even if your husband is simply suspicious, you have to go through this. Right? That's a real that's a real red flag, as they say. This is a text that exerts power. And it does so by invoking the male authority of the husband and the male authority of the priest, and by extension, the male authority of the deity. And while our previous texts treat like an abstract sort of control, a woman says something and the man cancels it. The woman can or can't own inheritance, but the male gets it anyway. Right? That sort of control is ideas or ability to do something. Here, the control is like physical, tangible. It's in her actual body. And not, again, to make everything about today's social issues, but this is a biblical text that exerts male control over women, not by denying them the right to abortion, but by forcing it. Right? I have been using the term miscarriage throughout, but that's not really quite right. A miscarriage is something that happens accidentally, right, without intervention. A forced miscarriage, right, or an induced miscarriage is an abortion. And so there's a reason that some folks, some interpreters, using that term lightly, go to great lengths to say that there is no pregnancy loss in this text. But wishing does not make it so. The text is obviously not meant, we can admit, it's not meant to be a statement about whether abortion is right or wrong. Right? This is the ancient world. There were, we know that people were having abortions We have medical texts from all across the ancient Near East. This text is not like, well, let me weigh in on the rightness or wrongness of abortion. That's our issue, not theirs. So it's not really about abortion, even as it invokes it, but it is decidedly about control of women's bodies. And in that sense, this text is engaging and participating in the same discourse as we are today.